Hello guys, my name is Arun and welcome to my channel. In this video, I will be explaining to you guys about the lot of frequently asked questions that one might come across while picking a Linux distribution. And also I'll be explaining you guys about quite a lot of things regarding Linux, uh, the basic things that you might have to consider while picking a Linux distribution and start working with them. Okay, so here in this video, I have curated a lot of commonly asked questions that one might have to come across, and a lot of terminologies that might come while searching for Linux distributions. What do they mean and everything? I will explain this everything. So this would be like a beginner's guide, a good introduction for anybody who's using Linux, who wanted to work with Linux. Okay, so let's start from the first question. What is actually Linux? Well, to put it in a simple terms, Linux is actually an operating system which is actually, as of now, it's being is actually made for certain target users, namely programmers, developers, IT professionals, scientific community users, and so many others. Okay, the reason for the Linux to exist is this operating system to exist is because um, um, from the- from uh, from the time when computers started coming into use, the first operating system that actually came into an existence, a fully fledged working operating system that came into existence was Unix. And after that, several operating systems came into picture. Okay, several versions of Unix came into picture, but many of them were not open source, okay, or free to use. All of them had proprietary licenses and licensing fee, and as a consequence there weren't any free and open source operating system that is available for users to work with. And in that being the situation, due to the GNU software foundation, and later because of the work done by a person named Linus Torvalds, a Finnish computer programmer and a software developer. Okay, Linux came into existence. Linus Torvalds wrote a kernel, a basic operating system kernel, then which he named it as Linux kernel. Okay, which actually mimicked how Unix operating systems work. Okay, and he added this kernel to the GNU software foundation, which is actually an open source software foundation, meaning you have softwares that are being developed in an open source manner that anybody can use and modify it. Okay, and now the merger of these Linux kernels by Linus Torvalds and the software developments made by GNU, they both merge together, and that's why you have this distribution Linux. Okay, these days this is pretty famous, and Linux is actually on the growth in many places. And now, how is it different from Unix? Is that, well, to be honest, there's not much of a difference. It is Linux is actually a software copy of Unix, meaning everything that you can do with the Unix system, you can do that with the Linux system, and added to that, you have many more features and customizability that is available in Linux. So Linux is like a software clone of Unix, and also a superset, meaning a software an operating system that has more features than that of the parent Unix. Okay. Now, with these two questions being answered, if you want to find a Linux distribution on the internet, okay, there are like plenty of choices available for the users to pick with, and many of the cases, one might be even totally confused as to confused to see the number of the flavors and options available for Linux. Okay, so in that point of view, one might come across the term called as distro. Okay, distro. So what does this Linux distro mean? Well, if you have some code for the Linux kernel, okay, some core Linux software, okay, to do a lot of operating system based work, okay, a package manager which can install, update, modify packages and software in your operating system, okay, with some user interface software, meaning softwares that can work with the user interfaces, and a desktop software which is the one that gives us the GUI, the GUI interface. Okay, so this is that is actually called as a Linux distro. Sometimes you might have Linux distros which may not have a desktop software and some user interface based software. For instance, this text editor I'm using, this is actually gedit, and this is actually user interface software, and this works because you already have a desktop software working on my operating system. Okay, so a collection of all of this is actually called as a Linux distro, and you have like plenty of Linux distros available. Okay, so in some Linux distros the software may not be available, so you have to work directly from the terminal. Okay, depending on them, okay, you have plenty of versions. Now one of the other questions might ask is, what are the different types, what are the difference between the distros? You have like plenty of distros available, Linux distros available, so what are the differences? One of the most fundamental differences between the Linux distros is that the way they perform the operations under the hood. So if you have like different versions of the Linux distros, if you have different Linux distros, the code in the Linux distros are not the same. Although they do the same function, how they are written, the manner in which they perform the operations under the hood, they are like, sometimes they might be similar, but many times they are completely different. Okay, many times they are completely different. So if you want to do any operation, let's say, how they perform it under the hood, okay, below how the user can notice, okay, they're remarkably different for the distros. So this leads to another question. Does this mean their performance might vary drastically by doing certain operations? Well, a little bit. Some distros are inherently faster, some distros are a little slower, some distros have more features, some distros have certain features, all of them depending on what kind of an aspect you're looking at. Okay, so that being said, the way they perform the operations under the hood is the major difference that differentiates all the different Linux distros that you might come across. Second thing is the purpose of creation, meaning certain distros are made with certain purpose in mind. For instance, there's a distribution of Debian called as Backtrack. Now it's called as Kali Linux. This distro is actually made keeping in mind the IT professionals who might want and network managers. Okay, all those people who work with the internet attacks and security attacks. Okay, cyber security professionals, because this distribution this distro Kali has a lot of software that can be used for checking spams and trying to prevent any cyber attacks, doing some forensics based on cyber security based forensics. Okay, data extraction, email checks and all. So you can do all of that using Kali. Okay, not that you cannot do with other software, but Kali is especially built for those kind of purposes. So if you're like someone who wants to work with these kind of software, choosing Kali would be a good option for you. Okay, so that's the purpose of creation. Next is the target audience. What I mean by target audience is the person whom you're trying to make this software appealing to. Certain Linux distros are not that easy for a basic amateur Linux user. Amateur computer user. Okay, certain distros are well developed and they are useful for the even simple users. Okay, so if you're like you wanted to have a Linux version, and that can be used by anybody, and has quite a lot of software packages. Okay, then you have to then there are certain simple versions that are existing that can be used by quite literally anyone. And if you're like someone who is working with slightly complicated processes, okay, who wants to know how the software works under the hood, you have certain degree of Linux distros which give you that feature. And if you're like someone who builds software, who makes software, and wants to see how they work under the hood into various detailed depths, okay, you have certain distros for that. Okay, so depending on those the distros are being made, and that is what I mean by target audience. Certain distros are actually targeted for beginners. Certain distros are targeted for intermediate users. Certain distros are targeted for advanced users who want to do quite a lot of stuff. And second thing is the software repositories. The second thing, final thing to be noting is that software repositories. Not all the distros have an elaborate software repositories. Some distros are very much active and they have quite a lot of software. Some distros may not have that much, and some of them will have very least just the fundamental ones, but not everything. Why the difference? It's again depending on the target audience. Suppose if you are like a newbie user, meaning who just into the computer who's into who doesn't have much software knowledge and who just wanted to start getting started, you might require quite a lot of software. Okay, and if you pick a distro that is targeted for an audience such as yourself, then those kind of a bigger user, that is, then the software repositories might be large and they might have many softwares in that collection. On the other hand, if you are like some intermediate user who uses only some specific set of tools or software, then the repositories might be significantly smaller. And if you're like an advanced user who's into developing software or developing the way in the kernels work or making modifications to them, then your software repositories might be even significantly smaller than the latter. So in those kind of cases, your software repositories are significantly the sizes of the software repository significantly different. So these are some of the things that differentiate between the distros, and you have to keep in mind. Okay. Now, with that being said, okay, I told you guys that the distros that the Linux distributions are differ among each other significantly. Now what I'm going to tell you guys is I'm just going to show you guys one flow chart about how the what are the Linux families and how they have been distributed, how are they branched out in the real world. Okay, so for that I have this image from Wikipedia. Okay, this gives a timeline about all the Linux distributions so far, and it is updated till more or less until mid of 2016. So this is a reasonably well updated chart. So let's start with it. Now, how to read about this chart is very simple. So you have the timeline on the top. So this line marks 1991. This is the end of this marks the beginning of 1992. This marks the end of 1992. So beginning of 1993. So on and so forth. Okay, and then whenever a new operating system begins, you have a dot. And then if there is some other operating system that is being branched out from an already existing operating system, you will have a branch like this. So how does this work is as follows. Initially at the beginning of time, there were only a few primary operating systems, Linux based operating systems. One of them is Debian. Debian started in let's see, this line stands for 1983. Okay, so Debian started somewhere in the mid of 1993, and then after Debian you have an SLS which started it earlier than 1993, somewhere in 1992, but one version of SLS was taken, and that became a major branch, and now that is called as Slackware Linux. So Debian is one family of Linux operating systems. Another distribution setup is Slackware, which started in 1993. And then you have multiple versions of it. We look at all the side branches in a while. And then in the end of 1994, you have another independent version of Linux distro, and this is called as Red Hat. Now Red Hat is again another super family of Linux distros. And then you have what you call as Enoch, which started in in the late 2000s, late 1990s, and now it is modified, and it got renamed, and it's existing as Gen 2. Gen 2. And after this, there is one more distribution called as Arch. There's one more distribution called as Arch, and there's again another family of Linux operating systems. And along with that, you have multiple small scale Linux distributions that started in various times. They kind of ended up. There are like small versions which are like entirely different from these super families of Linux distributions. And of course, some of them are still existing. For instance, like Peanut, which became as Linux. Okay, Linux. This is still existing till 2016. It's still running on. Certain operating systems like Midori or Tomb SRTBT, they started somewhere in the past. Now they're extinct. They're not available anymore. Meaning the development in this operating systems ended. And there's another version. Some of them are like Linux from scratch, which is still existing. Okay, and along with it, you have several versions of it. Some of them are existing, some of them are not. So you can have a look at it. And one of them, recent members in the family. Okay, recent members. There are like plenty. One of the recent family of members in the Linux family is the Android family. Now, all the phones you use so far, all the Android phones you have, it is actually that OS is again one version of the Linux kernel. Okay, so while the Linux kernels have been under constant development by Linus Torvalds, these families, all of these Linux distributions families, they use the Linux kernel and added more software features to make that develop around Linux kernels, and they release their own distributions. Okay, so now if you look at the sub branches, it might be easier. For instance, let's take Debian for instance. Debian could be a good benchmark to understand how the families work. Okay, how the Linux distribution families work. So Debian is like a primary Linux family member which is still existing. It's even there till 2016. It's going to proceed further. Development in Debian is still persistent. Now, what happened? How the other branches start as follows. Somewhere down the line in time, some people will have a certain set of software ideas in their mind, or certain softwares in their mind, and certain changes that they wanted to incorporate while developing the software. And those developments might be significantly different than what the direction of development the original parent Linux distribution might be going with. For instance, let's say Debian is going in one direction of software development, and all of a sudden some people who wanted to develop something which is diverging quite significantly from how Debian is working with, let's say. And what they do is they just take a branch of, what they call is a fork Debian, and they make a reference kernel, and from there on they start developing their own version. For instance, one of the good examples of a subfamily, okay, is actually is Ubuntu. Ubuntu is actually a subfamily of of Debian, wherein if you look at it, if you just zoom this out, this is Ubuntu, and if you look at it, Debian is a big family head, and Ubuntu is like a family of its own. It's so vast, and this entire tree branch is actually Ubuntu, meaning there are several distributions. So suppose Ubuntu started somewhere, it could be represented as separate family as well. Okay, now let me zoom this in. Okay, so the developers of Ubuntu, initially they have some native code from Debian, and they wanted to make certain modifications to it that are remarkably different from Ubuntu. Remarkably different from Debian, let's say. So they take a branch they take the software that is existing at that time, and then they start developing in their own path. Okay, they forge their own path. They take some references from the already existing family, and they start developing it. And similarly, this paradigm of forking from an already existing Linux distribution and developing your own flavor is the prime idea behind the existence of several versions of Linux. For instance, you have Lubuntu, LXLE, Yumi, iOS, PUD, Xubuntu, KDE, some of the new ones like KDE Neon, Maui Linux, Ubuntu Mate, Ubuntu GNOME, Ubuntu Desktop Pack, etc. These are all subfamilies of Ubuntu, but they all have a lot of things in common with Ubuntu, and afterwards they start diverging in their own path of development, which is significantly different from Ubuntu family, the main Ubuntu operating system. So that's how it is. Similarly, this kind of a family cycle can be noticed in all of them. For instance, even in Slack, where you have like separate families like Slacks, which has its own small family, but it's a small one, and you have a Suzy, which is actually Suzy, which is actually a branch out from Slackware. This is again another family, although a less diverse family, but it's still stable and working. Like that, you have several family branches out and existing, all of them. One of the interesting things is Red Hat, wherein Red Hat is actually a commercial distribution of Linux. Okay, is used for excuse me, which is actually used for servers having an operating. If you want an operating system for a server or a web server and a supercomputer, let's say, having Red Hat would be good because it's very stable and advanced and has a lot of protective backups in it. So it's pretty good for that matter. Red Hat, which later became Red Hat Enterprise. Okay, it just modified into Red Hat Enterprise. They renamed it. One version of Red Hat is actually called as Fedora. One branch or fork of Red Hat is Fedora. So what they do in Fedora here is, if they were developing certain software, let's say, and they want to experiment with it, and they wanted to add that, if they want to do a lot of experiments with it, Red Hat company does all that experimentation in Fedora, meaning they develop software in Fedora, okay, and experiment a few features in Fedora, and if those features are pretty stable and advanced, let's say, if they reach a certain amount of maturity, they take that developed software and bring that back to Red Hat and add it to the main operating system, main version of it. So this way, these branches also help in enriching and developing the true branch, the original branch of the operating system for that matter. So if there is any significant development available in CentOS or Fedora or any of these branches, let's say, the significant developments can be brought back to the original family or the parent of the family chain, and that can be added, and that becomes like that can be included in all the operating versions on that particular family. This particular feature is called as backporting, and that is one of the reasons how the branches are existing stable. Okay, suppose if that backporting is not present, then the operating systems might be significantly different. Then all of these branches have to detach themselves from the main family, and they have to behave on their own. Okay, this backporting ensures that there is quite a lot of common code between the family and the parent operating distro and the child operating distro, and this also helps in the overall development of the Linux community for all these branches. Okay, this is significantly true in Ubuntu and other branches as well. Although there is one thing is that I've been reading articles which stated that Ubuntu is working in such a fast pace and developing in such a manner that people in the Debian community, they're actually complaining to Ubuntu that they are diverging faster. They're diverging away from the Linux Debian distribution. Meaning, let's say there are certain softwares that are available Ubuntu that have been developed by Ubuntu. Those software might cause some instability or they're like completely they're like entirely different from how things might be in Debian. The interoperability between the parent software and the child software was significantly larger. The gap between them is significantly larger. So Ubuntu has been complained for being diverging too much from the Debian development path. But I'm just saying, if suppose one more question here is, if Ubuntu develops, let's say, okay, and adds a lot of features and comes up with a lot of features, those features can be with certain legal terms and procedures, they can be added to the Debian family, like that. So this way, the more branches you have for these Linux families, the more developments that you can anticipate. Okay, and one more thing is, what causes these families to rise and fall mainly depends on the community. Certain operating systems like certain companies like Canonical, they are private companies. There are plenty of private companies that support the development of certain Linux distributions. For instance, Ubuntu is supported by Canonical, okay, and that is a private proprietary company, but it supports the funding and research and development of Ubuntu, okay. Whereas many of the operating systems, such as Debian, for instance, Debian is completely free and open source community, where large number of people who are not in any corporation, but they voluntarily work and develop the software and improve the software, okay. And let's say the community loses track, or they lose interest, or they get bankrupt, or they find them, or they get bankrupt, or nobody is willing to pursue in a particular research development path or something like that, then the channels might then the development of that particular distro might come to a halt. On the other hand, if the development in a particular direction of a certain operating system is very, very favorable, or the community is very much enthusiastic, then you might have many sub branches and reactive developments. Ubuntu is again one example wherein Canonical took some base version copy of Debian and added their own features into it and started developing, and the development of Ubuntu was very inspiring. And the direction of it was very inspiring, that many people started gaining access to it and started developing their own flavors of it. And as a consequence, you have such a diverse varieties and flavors available. So there are certain ones that kind of terminated, but I think that is because they either lose finance, or the motivation behind the developers stopped, or the developing paradigm that they have might have gone to a dead end. Okay, and another thing is that sometimes certain branches can merge, meaning, let's say certain there are two distributions that are existing, okay, and the developers found some kind of a common idea. So what they might do is they might add all the features together and they might release a new version of distro. So that being said, okay, you initially might have two different distros, and now after that, when the developers found it interesting, they pick the best features of both the distros and then club them together, and they might release a new version of a distro. Okay, in that way, one of the earlier distros might get extinct, but they might proceed on as a new distribution. The development might proceed on as a new distribution. That way, we have quite a lot of distributions that are available for the user to choose. Now, next question that along with this is that, what are the major ones that to be looked at? So there you have Arch, you have Debian, you have Slackware Linux, you have Red Hat, you have Enoch, which is now called as Gentoo, and you have Android. Some of the most common ones and the recent ones in these major Linux families is that you have Manjaro and Antergos in Arch. These are the the desktop based versions of Arch distro, and these are much very user friendly. Arch is actually intended for advanced and intermediate and advanced users who want to develop software, make drivers, do a lot of research, and do a lot of programming in the software point of view. Okay, so it's based for those kind of people. Okay, suppose if you want that kind of stable feature, at the same time you want it to be much more user friendly. Okay, then Manjaro and Antergos are like are some branches of it that can be used. Okay, and of course there's Debian, and in Debian there are like several varieties you saw, and one of the major active members in Debian family is Ubuntu, and in Ubuntu you have several derivatives of Ubuntu like Kubuntu, Lubuntu, Xubuntu, Ubuntu Mate, KD Neon. There's just plenty. You can just if you guys if you want the entire details, you can just search in this. You can find it out. And one more important contributor is Knoppix, and from Knoppix there is one branch of Knoppix which is called as Backtrack. Okay, which is used for as I mentioned earlier, which is used by IT professionals for penetration, what you call as penetration testing and cybernet forensics. Okay, now it's Backtrack is called as Kali Linux. Okay, and there's another branch which is called as Slackware Linux, and one of the more important contributors, one of the major branches in Slackware Linux family is SUSE, which is now called as OpenSUSE. Okay, and of course you have of course there are like plenty of other versions of it. I'm just going to put a dots over here. There are plenty of other versions, and some of the important operating systems that are available in Red Hat are RHEL, which is now officially called as Red Hat Enterprise Limited. This is, among all the operating systems, this is paid or licensed. Okay, so you have to pay to get it. This is actually a proprietary operating system, so you have to pay to get the license for it. Why? I don't know. That's a company policy kind of. And then you have Fedora and CentOS. These are actually derivatives of Red Hat. And you have Enoch, and one of the major which is now called as Gen 2, and there are like a few family members of it. And of course there's Android, which is actually new in development. Okay, and that's existing. Now, one major question I might ask is, with all these distros, different types of distros existing, and the major Linux families and versions, subversions of all of these, okay, which distro should I pick? Now, you might be totally confused looking at it, totally baffled and confused with all this entire family tree we just saw some time ago. So, the natural question is, which distro should I pick? Okay. Now, these are actually my opinions based on whatever I learned. Okay, so take this in an appreciative point of view. Some of what I say as far as the opinions are concerned might be different from what your opinions are, what other people might say. So there is quite a lot of differences in them. People can agree on this. Some of them can agree. Some of them might disagree on it. So I'm just saying that these are my opinions, and my opinion. I mean, everybody's opinions are debatable. There are pros and cons about it. So take these with a pinch of salt. I mean, although this is not going to be totally wrong. So I'm just going to say that take this with a pinch of salt in an enlightenment point of view, so that you get some idea behind it. And of course, if you discuss this. If we discuss this with several other people, they might give you other opinions as well. So let's get it started with it. So if you're like a total newbie who has worked all his or her life in Windows, let's say, or you wanted to have an operating system that has to be very, very friendly, okay, with many of the software, which is actually whom I term it as starters. Okay, have any version of a desktop based operating system, meaning if your Linux distribution has a desktop software and quite a large collection of software, let's say, that you can do GUI based software that you can work with, okay, pick that, because that will be really helpful. The reasons why I suggest that is because once you install it, you can kickstart with your work immediately, and you don't have to you don't have to worry too much about the software for configurations and all, because they're already pre-built and they're already existing. Many of the softwares that you might want are already existing, and they can be installed very easily without worrying too much about it. Okay, and one point of view is that these distributions working with these distributions does not require the user to know about the system deeper. Okay, well, it's a natural evolution, process of learning, wherein if you're working with an operating system, you'll get to know more about it a little deeper, about all the nitty-gritty details and stuff about it. For starters, okay, these kind of operating systems do not require the user to know a lot of details. They just need to know some simple details that anybody will know, okay, and that will be sufficient for them to start. And these distros have the most aesthetic customizations, meaning they can do a lot of things with how the operating system might look, like the having themes in it, adjusting how the appearance should look like, having their own choice of fonts, colors, themings, how they look, okay, and how the software have some settings in the software. You can do all of that, okay, but you have the least software customization, meaning if you want to go under the hood and tweak the software and how they perform, okay, those are all not available. Okay, you don't have that much of a feature to go and tweak how the operating system how certain softwares might have to work, okay, because for that you need to know more about how the system works under the hood. Okay, so some examples for them is that some desktop based operating systems, like there are plenty. One of the best user friendly operating systems I noticed in this category is the Debian family. Okay, with my major personal emphasis to Ubuntu. Now I've been using Ubuntu for the past since 2014. So I haven't tried other distributions of Linux much. Okay, I have a virtual box and I have installed and I tried different versions of Linux distros. They are interesting. Okay, so I've been working with Ubuntu, the plain Ubuntu with the Unity desktop for a while, and I've also looked at how the different versions under the Debian family the desktop based difference look at. I found them the most friendly, the most easy to work with, and they have many of the softwares that are available for anybody to go and approach and install. So my preference is that I'll choose Debian. Then again, as I mentioned you guys earlier, this is my opinion. You are free to disagree with, okay, and I agree that I may not know others. I may not know other operating systems here. So I just want to put that out, okay. And recently there have been quite an explosive development in a lot of easy to use the software targeting beginners and starters that has been existing in almost all the categories. For instance, okay, Fedora, one of the secondary reasons for Fedora and CentOS to come into existence is because, okay, Red Hat wanted to have a developmental version that is available for the users to work with. Well, Fedora and CentOS are actually used by Red Hat for developing certain software, for doing their own research and making software, okay. And if those software are really working well, or certain features are really working well, the experimental ones, okay, if they turn out to be successful, they incorporate it back to Red Hat or RHEL, okay. And in this regard, they have provided many software for free, and Fedora and CentOS are again some of the other very user friendly operating systems that are available in Red Hat, provided by Red Hat. Similarly, there is SUSE or OpenSUSE. Some people call it OpenSUSE, which doesn't matter. Okay, this is again another friendly operating system. Okay, user friendly operating system available from Slackware, Kali is again a best user based, user friendly one, and almost all almost all the derivatives of Ubuntu are very user friendly. And as far as Arch is concerned, Arch Linux is concerned, which is actually one of the hardcore operating systems. Okay, Manjaro and Antergos are again versions of the same, which are very very user friendly and user friendly. And next is that what you call as for the intermediate users. And my suggestions include Red Hat, Fedora, and Fedora CentOS. Okay, these are my suggestions, and there might be other operating systems as well. I'm just listing out some of the very common ones. Okay, now why I put them in this category is because for the intermediate user, they may not be using all the software. They might be using only a certain amount of software. So as a consequence, not all the software one might require or need would be available in these packages, in these distros. Okay, and for certain software, instead of having them on a which is easily installable format, you might have to get the source code or in a semi-source code format, which you might have to compile, build, and install from scratch. Okay, that's the thing. And you need to know more about how the system works. Okay, a bit if you want to work with these operating systems, namely Fedora, Red Hat, CentOS, and others. Okay, and in these, just like as a natural progression, since it's related to intermediate users might not bother too much about how the aesthetics of how the operating system might look at. Okay, they might require many features, and they might feel that these features are redundant. Okay, on the other hand, they might require a lot of software customization, because they'll be the ones who will be tweaking the software, making it work as per their choice and stuff like that. So they'll require a little more software customization when compared to the starting these, but they might require less of aesthetic customizations. Okay, and next you come across the third category of users, namely the hardcore users. These are the people who would like to build their own software or drivers or do a lot of very nerdy stuff, I would put it. Okay, so for these users, some of the examples I suggest are Arch, the Debian, meaning the actual real Debian, the actual version of Debian, Slackware, Gentoo. Not the families, not the. If you guys notice, these are Arch, Debian, and Slackware. These are all not these are all the actual family line, the base family line from which of these Linux distros. Why? It's because in these distributions help you to develop any operating system, any software from scratch. Okay, you have only the core softwares, and most of the other software that you might require to work on them have to be installed or built manually. Sometimes, okay, you have to compile, build them, and many of the softwares might not be available. Okay, so you have to you might get the source code, and you have to build it build it from scratch. Okay, so this is definitely not for the faint-hearted or the beginner users. Like if you're a beginner user and you just start with these operating systems, you will be so shocked and flabbergasted. Okay, it'll scar you for life, and you won't pick these operating systems ever. You'll hate Linux, because you just have so many things to do. Just for an example, if you're like if you want to install Arch Linux, let's say, just follow the procedure. I've done this in a virtual box a few days ago, and I realized how complicated this is. It is a very long and lengthy process wherein you have to configure everything. Okay, in many of these intermediate and starter based operating systems, most of them is done for you automatically. All you have to do is just pick a few customization things. Okay, whereas here everything has to be manually made. Okay, the amount of approximations you have to do over here are very large, because many of them will be taken care of by the installer, where here you have to specify every little thing. Okay, so which leads to the next point. As a consequence, you need to know a lot about the system. You need to have a large amount of knowledge about the system to work with them. Okay, and as an extension to this, these are the least these operating systems are the least aesthetic customization, and you have the most software customization available. You can go and tweak your software to any extent as you want, because you're able to access the source code and even modify the source code and everything. You can do quite a lot of adjustments to them, to software wise. Okay, on the other hand, if you want to go on other hand, people who work, the hardcore users, they bother very less about the aesthetic customizations. Okay, so you don't have direct features to go and do that, because you have the software customization over here. Since you're able to go and do all the software customization, aesthetic customization becomes an integral part of it, so you can go and tweak it as per your choice, and you have the most options available to tweak it. Here in the starters, you build softwares to go and tweak the setting, whereas here you have the direct source code to go and tweak it. Here you have an operating system, and top of which you build a few software so that you can go and tweak it, which are actually under the hood go and change the source code. Here those softwares are not available, because the software customization allows you to go and tweak them as per your choice. So this is as per my opinion. On a general consideration, you have to consider while selecting or rejecting a certain distro is that, okay, see for the availability of software the user requires. Like if you are the user who wants to install Linux, let's say, just have a research, do your research, ask people, search in the internet, okay, and get quite a lot of information regarding the availability of software. Now there are many people in your company or in your workplace or in your research institution, and they who might work with Linux or some version of Linux. Ask them why they prefer that, and ask them why they prefer it, and why is there any other reason that they have to is there any other specific reason for certain Linux version. So if there is a significant reason for a significant and moving argument for choosing a certain Linux distribution, then stick with that. Fair enough. On the other hand, if the arguments are pretty weak or not so relevant, let's say, okay, one of the major criteria you should have in mind is the availability of software that you might require. And if you're like someone who likes to work with plenty of software and who needs a lot of software directly available, okay, then pick for a distribution that is kind of targeted towards starters. At the same time, you can do quite a lot of complicated options. Okay, for me, I'm sticking with Ubuntu because my personal experience with Ubuntu is that it's been wonderful. Although it's a bit glitchy once in a while, and it's slightly unstable a bit, partly because I go and mess it up. Okay, in its defense, I go and mess it up. Also, in the development point of view, it is a bit, I've been hearing a little bit of comments about the development being a little unstable and shaky in Ubuntu, but nevertheless, for me, I'm okay with Ubuntu because the deciding factor turned out to be the availability of software. And compared to other distributions, the Ubuntu repositories are pretty large, and they have quite a collection of software. So as a consequence, I kind of chose to stick with that. Maybe in the future, okay, I am experimenting with other operating systems as well. Okay, so maybe in the future, if I were to make a transition from one version of Linux to some other, I might make a call depending on the requirement and the need of the software that I might use. Second consideration to have in mind is that the degree of user preferred customizations, both in the aesthetics point of view and the software point of view. So if you're like a hardcore user who developing their own softwares and stuff, okay, and so if that being the case, then you might pick a software that allows you to do the customization. On the other hand, if you like a simple user who does not want to bother about how the software works under the hood, who just wants to get the benefits out of it and use it on the top level, the surface level, without worrying about what happening under the hood. Okay, I just want a little bit of aesthetic features. Okay, you can pick a distribution accordingly. So if you're like if you want let's say a Linux distribution that is pretty secure and stable, and it's very protected against let's say web attacks, let's say, then Red Hat would be a good choice for you. And if you like if you want plenty of softwares and not so much of customization both in the aesthetic as well as software point of view, but you want to have a lot of software, let's say, then having an Ubuntu with the Unity desktop would be like a good choice for you. Suppose if you want desktop features and you need to have a lot of customization, then you might pick a desktop version of Arch, let's say, like Manjaro and Antergos. Some of the examples. Okay, you can pick the other ones accordingly. So which category or which spectra do you fall in? Have that in mind and then look at it. And of course, do experiment with the other versions as well. And third reason I put is the motivation for a particular distro's existence. For instance, Slackware Linux actually exists. So that exists for certain people who are interested to build a Linux operating system right from scratch, who want to install, compile, and build an operating system right from scratch, who wants to have the most features available. Okay, that's their motto. And for those kind of people, and if you're expecting a distribution from Slackware Linux that is completely user friendly, even a beginner can use it, well, you're looking at the very wrong distribution. On the other hand, if you want an operating system that can be used for, as I mentioned earlier, for looking at the cyber forensics and penetration testing and like that, Kali is a good choice for you. Not that you cannot do with other software, but the other Linux distribution, but this Linux distribution is pretty good for that. Okay, and if you want to work with certain operating system that can be used in servers and and you get them running soon, and they have a lot of server-based facilities, Fedora and CentOS might be good options for you. Like that. Those are the reasons why the operating systems came into existence. So if your interest and the interest of these the major motive for these operating systems to come into existence are tallying up, then pick those. And one more important category to choose these operating versions is that do you want a point version or a rolling version operating system? Now what I mean by that is as follows. Now there are certain distributions which are rolling versions and point versions, meaning if you have a rolling distro, let's say, there's nothing called as a specific operating system version. Like in Windows, for instance, which many of you guys might be familiar with, you have different versions of it, like Windows 90, Windows 95, Windows Millennium, Windows 2000, Windows NT, Windows XP, Windows Vista, Windows 7, Windows 10, like that. Windows 8, Windows 10, like that. You have separate versions of it. These are actually what you call as point version distros, meaning you have specific versions with some limited software and OS updates. Every now and then you have an operating system, okay, and another operating system entirely develops in a separate branch, and while the new operating system comes into picture, you already have this point version that is existing, and you just keep on adding developments into it. Okay, and those marginal developments include some software updates and some basic operating system updates. That's about it. Usually these point versions are pretty stable, and the bleeding edge software might be available only in the next version or in the subsequent versions. Sometimes you might get the bleeding edge or the most the most recent versions of the software only the next version or in some of the updates. Okay. And if you want to let's say have a new version of the operating system installed in your system, let's say, either you have to uninstall the already existing distro, or totally upgrade it in a single setting. Okay, either you have to install from scratch or upgrade it. Okay, and that's how the condition is. And point version distros are, for instance, some of the examples of point version distros are Fedora, Ubuntu, and there are several varieties of Ubuntu, and all of these and many others. Many of the distros you might see are actually point version distros. They release several distros every once in a while, and they have support for it, and then you can upgrade them to a higher version whenever there is a facility. For instance, giving one example, in Ubuntu releases one version of a distro every 6 months or twice a year. Okay. In the beginning of April, they release a version called as with the suffix 0.0, the suffix 04. Okay, an April edition, and you have a version in October which is called as 0.10. The October editions are the bleeding edge software. They have less support, whereas the editions which are released in April, they are like intermediate stable versions which have quite a lot of excellent features that were developed and modified and tested using the October editions. And every 2 years you'll get what you call as an LTS version, or the long term support editions, which come in April. Okay, they have support for 5 years, and you can upgrade between them. And all these distros have a feature to upgrade between an intermediate version and a long-term version. Okay. And every once in a while, if there is any significant updates or improvements in these intermediate versions, those updates get backported to your long-term versions. Okay. So this is the thing about point version distros. And one more one of the advantages of point version distros is that usually they are stable. And one of the disadvantages is that although you can upgrade, sometimes if you upgrade too much, meaning let's say you have a very old version, you upgrade it to new versions by upgrading it twice or thrice, then your system might become unstable. So every once in a while you might have to, if you're having a newer version of the operating system, let's say, instead of upgrading it, you might have to take a backup and wipe your hard disk off, and then have a clean installation from scratch. You have to do that. Whereas for the rolling version distro, one of the best examples for them are Arch and Gentoo. You have no specific operating system version. Okay, the operating system gets updated every now and then. Okay, you have plenty of software that corresponds to both the kernel as well as the software. Okay, they all get updated every once in a while. So if you have a major distribution major development available in any of these software, they get updated every once in a while. Okay, and only a certain snapshot or certain reference versions are called as operating system versions. So here in rolling versions, okay, there's nothing called as a single version that's continuously evolving. Your operating system is continuously evolving. So for new users, let's say, to facilitate the new users, certain snapshots of the operating system that exist in the internet, okay, with all the software bundles they have, those snapshots are called as reference versions, and they are given on operating system version name. That's it. Okay. Only those snapshots are called as operating system versions, and mostly your software is on a rolling duration, meaning your operating system gets updated every once in a while. Okay, in some bits and pieces. So if you have an operating system which was installed 10 years ago, let's say, okay, and you have it continuously, even today your rolling distribution operating system will be completely up to date with what's available. And it's like if you have Windows 95 and it slowly adds more features, slowly and steadily, step by step, it adds features, and it gets converted into Windows 2000, Windows XP, Vista 7, 8, and then finally 10. Imagine a kind of a significant change from Windows 95 to Windows 10 on a slow basis, with updates happening every once in a while. Okay, if that is an example of how a rolling distribution works. Okay, and as a consequence, you get the most bleeding edge software available. And what I mean bleeding edge is the most updated and the recent version of any software. Okay, you get the latest versions of any of the software you use. So that's one of the advantages. So your system is always up to date. Okay, up to date. And one of the significant advantages of having a rolling version distro is that you don't have to uninstall the version and reinstall them every now and then from scratch. Okay, you don't have to upgrade every entire operating system in one single stretch. Rather, you upgrade some fractions of it every now and then. Okay, now and then. So even if you have one operating system, with just one click of a button, you are able to one click of a button, you get the latest versions easily. And one major disadvantage of having a rolling version distribution is that there is a chance for it to become slightly unstable. Let's say you're having the latest version of a software, and that latest version has some bugs or it's slightly unstable, then your operating system can become unstable. Mostly people working in the rolling version distros, they prevent that from happening. But then again, once in a while you might come across those kind of situations. But fortunately, with rolling version distributions, you have an option to what you call as roll back. Meaning, if you already have a version of an operating system, if you already have a version of your operating system in the past that was pretty stable before the updates happened, you can remove the new updates and go back to the previous version with a little adjustments. You can go back to the previous version where it was stable, and then wait for a while for all these bugs to be fixed by the people working in the community or in the company, and then upgrade and then roll over for the newer versions. Okay, that is perfectly possible. In that way, these systems are pretty stable. So that's one of the advantages, and this is actually available, not much available in other systems. Okay, why people prefer point version or a rolling version distribution? Well, it's mostly dependent on their development cycle and what prefers them. Some people prefer a rolling version and some people prefer a point version. Well, it depends. And the other questions are like, I have these versions. Okay, how do I install software and packages? And for that one of the important things you need is called as a package manager. Essentially, what a package manager does is as follows. It's actually a software that helps you to install, remove, update and upgrade your software as well as your operating system kernels. Okay, and sometimes you can use a package manager to build and compile, that is make your own software using the source code. Like, let's say you have the source code for the operating system for certain programs, and you want to build it from scratch. Okay, sometimes the package manager or some of the tools that you might come across might be available for that to be possible. Okay, so some of the examples of package managers that you might come across internet are apt or apt. There's one more called as aptitude. There is yum, there is YASTAS, DNF, Synaptic, AUR, PAMAC, Octopi, Yaourt, and all. APT is actually the package manager for APT or apt-get. Is actually a package manager for Debian, Ubuntu, Debian-based operating systems, especially like Ubuntu derivatives, Kali, and some versions of Debian. Okay, Yast is another operating system. Package manager. I don't recall for which it belongs to. Anyway, and you have Yum. Yum is actually a package manager for Fedora. I guess it's also package manager for CentOS if I'm right. And you have Synaptic, which is again a package. These are package installers and package managers. I'm just clubbing both of them together, and you have many of them available over here. Okay, and you might ask me why there are so many package managers. Well, it must have been pretty obvious. It must have been pretty obvious. As of now, if you look at it, there are quite a lot of Linux versions available, and as a consequence, quite a lot of Linux versions that are available, and as a consequence, each of them have their own developmental method, and the internal architectures being different, they have to come up with their own package managers and software installers, and that's why you have so many package managers. So as a consequence, certain package managers will not be available for certain operating systems. Okay, reason is because the entire system architecture is different. For instance, if you want to have Yum package manager for a Debian system, let's say, I guess it's not possible. If I understand right, it's not possible. Okay, and each of the package managers have their own collection of software, and sometimes that can make a big significant difference as a deciding factor for choosing distros. And nowadays, people are working on a particular topic called as what do we call as a universal package manager, meaning one single software that are built on a single package manager that can be installed for all the systems, all the Linux versions, regardless of which distro they're using. Okay, and one of the examples for that is called as Snappy or Snappy Package Manager. Okay, and the software they call it software that are installable through them are called as Snappy packages or Snap packages. Okay, to have some kind of a standard package manager for all the Linux versions. Okay, Snap is pretty workable for that. Okay, so once this is actually under development, and people suggest, and let's say if this becomes very successful in the future, regardless of regardless of which operating system you use, which version of Linux you use, your softwares will be available. Your softwares will be available directly through that. Once you have that, the requirement for having specific package manager for each and every Linux distribution will fade away, and you'll have a single software store. Okay, it's like having a Google Play, or having Google Play Store for all your Android versions. You have all the softwares available through that. It's just like that. This will be like an app store for Mac, or Google Play Store for Android. That's what they're trying to look at. And one of the other important criteria for deciding about the Linux distro is actually the desktop. What I mean by desktop is as follows. Remember, as I told you guys in the earlier part of the video, a Linux distro might have some user interface software and desktop software, and this desktop software is what I mean by a Linux desktop. This is the GUI interface for Linux OS, and there are like unlike Windows. Okay, you have several varieties of Linux desktops available. Some of the most common ones and developing ones are Unity. Unity is like a trademark. I won't say it's a trademark. Unity is like product. It's developed from Canonical company, which is like a benchmark benchmark desktop environment for desktop software for Ubuntu. And you have GNOME, and you have KDE, which is also called as Cool Desktop Environment, and you have Budgie Desktop, you have XFCE, Pantheon, Deepin, LXQT. There's it's Mate, which got developed recently. There's Cinnamon, and there's Enlightenment, etc. These are some of the most common desktops. Now, what is the difference between the desktops is as follows. Software, customization, okay, resource usage, and that is pretty important. Resource usage, hardware capacity, look and feel, features, and software bundles. Now let me go through that one by one. Suppose if you want to open a terminal or open something, have certain features, start a new tab, open a new tab, or do something like that. Okay, the shortcuts that exist between different versions of your Linux desktops are different. Okay, suppose for instance, when Unity, if you press Ctrl+Alt+T, you'll get the terminal, whereas the shortcuts for the same in other desktop environments might be different. Okay, so like that. This is just one example. Similarly, if you want to start any other program or something like that, the shortcuts might be significantly different in different Linux distributions. Second is customization. What I mean by customization is as follows. Now in Ubuntu, let's say Unity desktop, let's say, okay, you have the feature to you have the features recently have the feature to bring the bring this dash bar on the bottom. For quite a long time, this dash bar was only available on the left, and you do not have any permission to move it and bring it to the bottom. That was not available. Okay, that's one customization. That's one of the examples of customizations. And if you wanted to go and change if you want to go and change the location of this close, minimize, maximize button on, if you want to push these buttons to the left, it's existing in the left, but if you want to push them to the right, let's say, okay, that's again another example of customizations. If you want to have a certain theming, you want to go and change how the cursor looks, your theme, how the software might look, the folder icons, the icons for status notifications, like that. Okay, these customization features and degree to which the customizations can exist or are available are significantly different in many of these desktops. So they have the amount of customization that is existing and the amount of features that they can provide, they might become a deciding factor for a new user or an experienced user in selecting an op distro. Sometimes certain desktops are pretty good. They have certain features, and and that kind of gives them a leverage or an advantage. Sometimes certain customizations not being present gives them the advantage. Again, it depends on factors. For instance, KDE Neon, as far as I've heard, KDE is actually one of the few desktop environments which are significantly mature and significantly developed, which provides quite a lot of customizations. Some of the newer desktops which are very promising and very attractive and interesting Mate. It's not Mate. The developers call it Mate for some reason. Mate and Cinnamon. These are like very good competitors. GNOME is actually some reference desktop environment for any benchmark comparison. And of course you have Unity, but Unity is like not much used in other desktops. It is kind of like signature mark of Ubuntu desktops. And some of the things are that each of them have their own pros and cons. For instance, KDE has a lot of customization features, but in slightly older versions, it was pretty unstable because they were developing a lot, and it was pretty unstable, and a lot of things tend to happen. Okay, for another example, XFCE, there's some people call it XFace. Okay, this desktop environment has minimalistic graphics. It may not look as pretty. It may not look as pretty as KDE or other desktops, but they provide quite a lot of features. It is quite a lot of features, and it's extremely light on the resources. Among all the desktops that are available, XFCE is one of the least resource hogging desktops. Meaning, if you just have an operating system just opened up, let's say, with just only the background process is running, a desktop having an XFace. Linux version having an XFace desktop will have the least amount of memory usage when compared to others. Unity is good, but it has quite a lot of memory usage. Similarly, this kind of varies depending on the operating system, the distro you use again. So resource usage is one of the major differences, and hardware capacity. Likewise, okay, this is kind of directly related to the resource usage. Suppose if we have a very old system, let's say, and you want to be very stingy on the resources used, then you might have to pick a desktop that is that starts quickly and does not uses resources much. Okay, and that's one of the criteria. That's one of the differences between them. look, as far as the look and feel is concerned, this would be like the most obvious factor. Okay, although the shortcuts is one thing, look and feel features are one of the most obvious factors, and it's a major deal breaker and deciding factor for the familiarity of distributions. Okay, um, I think this is quite self-explanatory. Some of them might like Unity, or some of them might like GNOME for over Unity, or Unity over others. Some people might prefer KDE for all these factors and how the system might look and all the customization features and stuff. So this is pretty self-explanatory. And of course, one of the other factors is the features. What are the features they have in case of customization, tweaking, and all the other things that you can do with. Okay, and of course, on other one, although slightly insignificant one, but can be added is that the software bundles. What kind of softwares they come by default when you install a particular desktop in an already existing Linux distro. That collection matters a bit. For instance, based on whatever I looked at, the default media player that is available in Unity is Rhythmbox, and there's a separate software called as Videos for looking at the videos. The text editor, that basic text editor that is available in Unity is gedit, okay, which is kind of based on GNOME. GNOME, whereas the same software might be different in KDE. I just worked with KDE for a while, and there the default text editor is Kate, whereas the the media player is VLC, and like that. There's quite a lot of slight differences. And as far as the desktop, as far as the choosing which desktop to look at, okay, what should I look at? Well, have a look at all these points and keep it into consideration. And added to that, there are a few more things that to keep in mind. Look at how the desktops are, the stability of the desktops. Ask from people who have worked with different desktops, okay, and from research and from comments and reviews about them in the internet, about the stability and their feedback about it. That will give you quite a good insight about the stability. Some versions of some of the desktops are quite stable and they're pretty good, and they're fine. That will be very usable. They may not crash. On the other hand, development progress and path and direction. This is also important. For instance, I can explain this with KDE. As far as KDE is concerned, okay, few years in the past, if someone is having a KDE desktop, let's say, that would be very hard for them to work with. Meaning, there will be quite a lot of bugs. There will be a lot of fluttering. There will be quite a lot of bugs. There will be a lot of fluttering. The system might hang, and you have a lot of customization. The customization might become a bit aesthetic. Might become inconsistent, and might be the design cohesion might not be the same. Okay, now if you KDE desktop that is available right now, it is pretty mature, pretty stable, yet it provides all the customization that is available for that they intend to provide, and it's pretty stable. Okay, and the KDE, they initially and the development progress of KDE is in a good way. It's in an interesting point of view. So if you guys are trying to look for Linux distribution, let's say, just have a look at how KDE looks and feels like from articles or the desktop reviewers. That will give you quite a lot of insight about how it works. And then of course, you're welcome to try. So these things matter most. So if you're you want a stable version, you want a stable version, or you want it to be a good development progress, set accordingly. Ultimately, one of the things is, are you happy with it? Are you happy with all the choices or the options that are available? Some desktops might not have that feature. Some desktops have certain features. Are you happy with that? That should be a deciding factor, one of the deciding factors. And to sum it up, we have quite a lot of versions in Linux, and you can do quite a lot of operations in Linux. And the one good thing is you have most of them, almost all of them, are available for free. And I just wanted to close this video. I know it's pretty long. I want to close this video by showing you this picture, showing you this funny picture that I found in the internet. It kind of gives a comical representation of the kind of caliber a person has while working with the different versions of Linux. Okay, I mean, the more longer your beard is in this illustration, the more you know about the Linux operating system. So if you're like some beginner, okay, who just working, who does not know much about the software tweaks and system settings and all, okay, you might prefer Ubuntu. Okay, that because you get started with your work very easily, and it's very easy to work with. Okay, so if you want to jump into the Linux world, let's say, as of today, Ubuntu is one of the places or soft distributions where you can just dip your toes and start working with Linux and get to feel the power of it. And then you have Fedora, just little more, which has more customizable facility in terms of software, where you can get a little more freedom, and you get a lot more knowledge on that. And of course, and then you have Debian, where you can do quite a lot more information. And then you have Arch, where you learn quite a lot about the operating system, more than what you can learn from a Debian operating system. You have learn more in Arch. And then you have Gentoo, where you learn even significantly larger. And finally, you have Slackware or Linux from scratch, wherein you learn the most, kind of indicated by how long your beard is. But this is actually in a funny tone. Okay, this is actually in a funny tone, but it kind of drives a point that what kind of an operating system that you might prefer, and it also indicating some kind of the age-wise comparison. Like if you are someone who's very young, who just wants to get software, who does not have much experience with operating systems, you might prefer Ubuntu. As you start working with some simple softwares where you can do quite a lot of options, you might prefer to work with slightly challenging Linux distributions. And when you're pretty old, let's say, indicated by how long your beard is in this schematic, you might want to flex your muscles even bigger, even more than what you did, and then pick some software that is pick some version of your operating system which allows you the most features, the most customizable features. Okay, that would be a Linux scratch. So Linux scratch or Slackware would help you to do that. Okay, now with that being said, that's all I have for you guys in this video. I know this is pretty long, but this will if you hear this video, many of your questions you might have as a beginner as well as an advanced user would have been answered in a single shot. Okay, I recommend this video for anyone who want to dip their toe in Linux okay, to get all the details they want, so that they can start searching. And of course, another suggestion I would give is, like, if you want to try different versions of operating systems in different versions of Linux, let's say, pick VirtualBox. Any VirtualBox software, create virtual machines and install them. That will be your best friend. Instead of migrating and experimenting the software directly on your hardware, okay, by installing already existing Linux version and all, instead of that, have a VirtualBox software, install your Linux versions, Linux distros in that, see for yourself how good it is, give a trial run in that, see for yourselves, and then pick one that you find it most comfortable and that suits your requirements and needs very easily. Okay, that's all I have for you guys in this one. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in another tutorial with another interesting topic. Till then, take care.